holders are not those platforms, and that is the issue at stake today. We have established a solid basis to make progress here. It would give member states a guidelines to implement this in law, and I think that this has been the correct approach and continues to be the correct approach to make progress, balanced progress between copyright, the digital world, and freedom of opinion. Thank you.
Thank you. I now give the floor to represent the Committee on Internal Market and Consumer Protection. Mr. Dante, you have 1 minute, please.
Thank you, President, Commissioner, colleagues. Now, the fact that we need a European reform of copyright in the light of the digital revolution, I think, seems patently clear. This directive sets out very clearly principles that the Parliament has endorsed many times over the years, in particular the responsibility of platforms and a greater equality in the economic arena. The media bombardment over the last few days has again tried to distract attention against the true issues at stake today. This directive will not lead to censorship nor limitation of the freedom of the network, which we continue to support. It's not going to have an impact on SMEs, nor will it have an impact on dissemination of knowledge, which are non-profits, such as the encyclopedias on the web. Now, behind the fake news of these days, what is underlying those is specific interests of those people who wish the network to be a Wild West, which is dominated by their own large platforms. Conversely, however, the new rules simply seek to give fair remuneration to creators and authors, which are always the backbone of European culture and are therefore a key part of our economy. Thank you.
Thank you. I now give the floor to Commissioner Gabriel. Thank you.
Merci beaucoup, Madame la Présidente.
Thank you very much, Chair. Thank you, Rapporteur, Shadow Rapporteurs, dear members. First of all, I would like to thank you all for the constructive debates we've had over the last 2.5 years. The directive on copyright is a key element of our digital single market strategy. And on behalf of the Commission, we're very pleased to see that a provisional political agreement has been reached on this very important file. Dear members, this is a key moment for Europe's culture, for our digital economy, and for defending Europe. This new copyright directive will enable us to reach our common goal, which is that of adapting copyright to the 21st century. The directive will benefit those who make sure that our European values are what they are: authors, performers, journalists, press editors, book editors, film makers, researchers, librarians. Copyright is the right of creators. It will protect right also to access Europe's culture online, even for our citizens. For the very first time in Europe's legislation, individual creators will benefit from specific provisions that will strengthen their negotiating positions and will enable them to receive fair remuneration. All of these actors, all of these authors are watching us, and they're hoping that Europe will keep its promises, making sure that our creators are better equipped. That is making sure that our culture stays alive. We want to better equip our journalists to protect our democracy. This text is compromised, but it's also ambitious. It recognizes that copyright holders need fair wages and makes sure that they will be, whereas service providers will only have a proportionate burden to carry. And we also make sure that freedom of expression is protected. The Commission will be publishing a declaration on the situation of the organizers of sports events that will go alongside this directive as well. And so I'm very pleased that I'm here and that I can now take in your views, and I hope sincerely that we will see support for this copyright directive, and that we, with that, can once again send a strong signal, a signal to our creators, our authors, and a signal for our values. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Commissioner. And I'll give the floor for 1 minute to Mr. Krasnodowski on behalf of the Committee on Industry, Research and Energy. Sir.
Thank you very much, Chair. The copyright directive is necessary. We all are aware of its necessity. When the InfoSoc and e-commerce directives were adopted a while ago, and they've since become outdated. In some cases, they distort market relationships in a dangerous way. So you'd seem on the surface to think that it'd be a clear-cut thing, but this directive is not. It has been manipulated. It's become a battlefield for giant corporations on the one hand, and lots of people have taken to the barricades on both sides, and I stress that both sides, both press publishers and e-commerce giants, and they've stimped no money on manipulating people who've sadly become susceptible to that kind of blackmail. There are scientists, educators, theatre directors, museum workers, creative artists who are waiting for a resolution to this issue, but no one really seems to mention them. This Parliament is not, I think, in a position to take a sensible decision in this matter, and I think we should defer it to the next legislative period. Thank you.
Thank you. For 1 minute for the Committee on Culture and Education, Mr. Joulot.
Oui, merci, Madame.
Thank you, President. A lot has been said about the benefits of this text. I'm not going to spend much time on that. There's only one question that remains. What does this vote represent for Europe? We're here at the forefront of digital regulation. We want to become a model for the world to follow. And we have a clear choice. Either we reaffirm our position of leadership or we just renounce it. We now have a text that comes from a trialogue, and it's an all or nothing choice. And if we were to undermine this text, we would be really serving the interests of GAFA. And it would not benefit citizens, it would not benefit creators, it would not benefit SMEs, it would only benefit GAFA. Because what Europe's citizens want is an internet that's fair, where authors receive fair wages, and where daily usage is protected. And that is what this text offers. It protects freedom of expression as well. The only thing that's at heart here is whether or not platforms have a responsibility to society. That's what the question we need to answer. And I think that my response and that of Europe should be a resounding yes, they are responsible and should be. Thank you.
Now, 1 minute, Mr. Boney for the Committee on Civil Liberties, Justice and Home Affairs.
Article.
Thank you. Now, Article 13 was a source of doubt from the very start, and that's why we needed a clear legal compromise uniting the rights of authors, platforms and users. The internet is not just a way of accessing the work of famous authors and journalists. It's also a creative place, digital creatives, and there's millions of people use it every day. It's false to say that there's no general monitoring obligation, because there's a obligation here to check everything here under a license. Now, if you're promoting your product as a pastiche, and pastiche is accepted, then is a machine filter going to recognize that pastiche? It's going to end up as a responsibility of the platforms. They're going to be very cautious, and I do not want corporations to decide on what is acceptable content. It's going to end in excessive caution because of fear of fines. In the past, this is called censorship. In a digital age, this is a mistake, but it's a mistake which has a massive reputational consequence. I'm in favour of deleting Article 13, and only then can I vote in favour of what is very, very good in this report. And I would like to thank Axel for the hard work he's done here, because we're almost there. Thank you.
Colleagues, I was a little bit more flexible with the opening round of speakers on behalf of committees and the rapporteurs. I will not be flexible from here on in. Mr. Swoboda, you have 1.5 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. And Madam Commissioner, the European Union needs reform of copyright. We need to find a new balance between the interests of users, authors and platforms, as well as other interests. I mean, we're in the digital age, this is the 21st century, and I'm therefore glad that this copyright proposal has new proposals to protect creative interests in the interest of protecting cultural heritage and creativeness. I am pleased that this proposal confirms publishers' rights, but that is also prepared to face the parasites, platforms which steal copyrighted content. Some have criticised this proposal. They say that it's going to censor the internet. But what is real internet censorship is something different. You'd be censoring the internet if you prevented talented authors and artists from being able to earn a living from their talent online. If you created an environment where they'd have to work in a shop or drive a taxi, and that they can only turn to their creative work and do what they want after their work, that is real internet censorship. Now, I personally am satisfied by the outcome of the trilogue, satisfied better than the original Commission proposal. I'm very pleased.
Thank you. For 1 minute, Madam Geringer de Oedenberg.
Thank you. For the past 2 years, we have debated different versions of Article 13, and now it is certain this text will change the internet as we know it and will have vast negative effects on the way people share and acquire knowledge. We all had one great objective in mind, to help authors and performers, but in the end, we failed to strike a balance between the rights of all the parties involved. This is a big mistake. Therefore, the only choice we have now is to delete Article 13. This is the minimum necessary to make this directive less devastating for the European digital companies and our citizens, who already demonstrate against this file in majority of capitals across the EU. The mandate we had from the European Parliament clearly protected and excluded the European small and medium enterprises from the scope of Article 13. Unfortunately, this is no longer the case. Therefore, they will be obliged to buy expensive filtering technology, at the moment produced only by American giants. In the current text, all commercial websites and apps that allow users to post content will have to make best efforts to buy licenses for anything that a person might possibly upload in the future.
Thank you,
this
Madam.
Obviously is impossible.
Madam, I'm really
achieve.
sorry, but I did warn, so apologies to interrupt you. Now, there is a blue card request from Mr. Roda, but Mr. Roda, you have speaking time, so perhaps you could address it in your speaking time. I'll reserve blue cards for those who are not involved in the debate. Mr. Karim, for 1.5 minutes, please.
Madam President, Commissioner, may I first of all congratulate Axel on a job very well done in getting this file to this particular stage. Now, colleagues, my priority throughout has been to make sure that right holders and creators continue to make a living in the creative industries and that their exclusive economic rights, including communication to the public, were protected. This was essential given the emergence of new business models and platforms, which has led to an uneven playing field. It was not an easy negotiation, but I'm satisfied that my particular goal was achieved and that the necessary safeguards are in place. I will therefore be supporting the outcome in today's votes, given the many improvements which have been made, and these include text and data mining will be possible for commercial purposes across the EU for the first time. Article 11 was improved during negotiations so that the future of publishing industry is secure. The right will only apply to individual words and small extracts of text that are shared online. Article 13 clarifies that the platforms within the scope communicate to the public are no longer eligible for the e-commerce safe harbour and will be required to seek authorisation and fairly share revenues which they derive from copyright protected creative works. And the list goes on, and in particular the flexibility that we have been able to maintain for member states is essential, and there is not going to be any general monitoring of users. So despite what some platforms have tried to persuade the general European public of, that has been nothing but an exercise of misleading and misinformation, and this Parliament will push back against that type of exercise.
Sorry, Mr. Roda, you want to make a point?
Yes, Ms. President, I do, because I find it absurd that you're preventing a debate. Listen, the whole world is watching us today, and everyone comes down in the plenary and are holding their own homemade speeches, and we don't have a debate on such a crucial topic because you're preventing it. I don't think that's wise, and I don't think it's fair. Sorry.
I agree. I'd love for everyone to have speaking time. I'm conscious that people have been in the chamber who are not on the list and want to speak. You are on the list. I have to make a judgment call, and I try and prioritise catch the eye. Now, if you want this debate to go longer and have an exchange, I'm open to that, but I will have a problem with the services. So I hope you can understand the reason for that decision, but I hope you can make your point when I give you the floor, but I do take note. Now, from 2 minutes, Mr. Cavada.
Merci, Madame.
Thank you, President. This morning is a historic moment because for the very first time on a continent, a parliamentary assembly is trying to rebalance the relationship between GAFA and those that feed into GAFA, creators and the press, the media. The creation economy, 330 billion every year, is threatened by the unfairness of this financial relationship. But it's also a fact that the press, the media economy is falling apart, and this is not just unfair, it's dangerous because, dear colleagues, because, President, the media is the basis of our democracy. When we no longer have a free press, when there's no journalist on Google, on Wikipedia, on YouTube or anywhere else, then we will no longer have any information. We will only have rumors like those that we've been hearing for the last few months around this debate. This is the only opportunities for creators and for press associations and publishers in Europe to redress the balance and protect their future. That is why we must vote in favor of this text, and we must do so in block. We have to reject all the amendments because adopting this text is only a first step. We will need other steps to really rebalance the situation. We will not people talk about Wikipedia. Wikipedia is protected in this text. People talk about their concerns about filters. There will be no filters on Wikipedia. And why do we have all these ideas circulating in this hemicycle? Well, because for the first time in my 15 years in this house, we've been bombarded as if we were, political intellectual prisoners of giants that are watching over all of our activities. We have to adopt this text in block, because otherwise we will see very serious consequences for the intellectual heritage of Europe. Thank you very much.
Sorry, colleagues. Just to say, I already have 12 catch the eye, and that number is increasing. Madam Reda, for 3 minutes.
Ladies and gentlemen, there are three things in the debate on copyright that have been hitherto unknown. First of all, 200,000 people this weekend demonstrated against this reform. 5 million have signed a petition against upload filters. There's never been such a broad protest against an EU directive. Secondly, there have never been any protests that have been so roundly ignored by this House. Already in summer, voters were bombarded with disinformation campaign. And instead of tackling the criticism, any critical voices were simply met with offence. Colleagues such as Kavada kept saying that emails were coming from bots. EU commissioners were calling the criticisers as thugs. And Kaspari was saying that protesters are being paid. All of this defamation is a pure fiction, and it's very easy to refute it. They've been launched by just a few lobby groups, and they've been disseminated in all sorts of newspapers that are hoping to profit from the copyright reform. But unfortunately, this disinformation has worked. Today, where pictures of mass demonstrations are being broadcast around the world, people still believe that the emails don't come from real people. Now, this belief that any criticisms coming from America has inured people to actually grappling with the content, irrespective of whether warnings against upload filters are coming from the UN Special Representative for Freedom of Opinion or the Federal Commissioner for Data Protection or other research centres. Thirdly, neither the Union, the SPD or the opposition actually think this is a good reform. No one wants to take the political responsibility for these upload filters that are part of Article 13. But the federal government is still going to vote in favour. Colleagues, you've had your time. I'd also like to have my time, please. Madam President, I'm waiting for silence in the room.
Excuse me, Madam Reda, is Herr Brock, bitte.
Mr. Brock.
Madam Reda has the floor. Respect the speaker who has the floor. Madam Reda, please continue. Thank you.
No one in the German government wants to take responsibility for these upload filters, not even Chancellor Merkel. But the German government is still going to vote in favour. And since yesterday, we know why that might be the case, because the Frankfurter Allgemeine newspaper has actually uncovered a horse trading between France and Germany, where Germany accepts these upload filters in return for France's agreement to the Nord Stream pipeline. But what...
Madam, I'm delighted you're all wide awake this morning, but please allow Madam Reda to continue speaking, and that's from both sides of the House. Madam Reda.
Ladies and gentlemen, the most tragic fact here is that there's a new generation that will be voting for the first time in the European elections are actually learning their lessons, that their protests count for nothing, that politics is going to disseminate lies about them and is not going to listen to real arguments when it comes to very tough geopolitical interests. They are going to be marked by this sense of helplessness. Colleagues, however, we cannot conduct politics like this. This directive should not get through unamended. It would not only be detrimental to freedom on the internet, but it will take the trust away from a whole generation of their faith in politics. They won't believe that this Parliament is supporting their interests. That's why we should not allow Articles 11 and 13 to get through.
Mr. Kaspari has a question. Will you accept?
Yes.
Mr. Kaspari.
Sehr geehrte Kollegin.
Ms. Reda, have I understood you rightly that you have accused me of saying that demonstrators have been bought for money? Well, if that's what you said, because that's what I understood you to say, then I would like to clarify and repeat what I said. And please just take my words at value, and please don't misinterpret my words as you and other interested parties do. I said there is an evident attempt to block adoption of the copyright reform with purchased forces. Now, I didn't mean the thousands of young people who are going to the street.
Immer verteidigen, weil ich überzeugter Demokrat bin.
Okay.
Aber wenn die Frankfurter Allgemeine...
If the Frankfurter Allgemeine Zeitung... Okay, microphone has been cut off.
Mr. Kaspari, it's 30 seconds for a question. You have made your point, and I will now invite Madam Reda to respond. It is 30 seconds, that is the rule, and we are rules-based. Danke. Madam Reda will reply.
Mr. Kaspari, well, you yourself have just said it. You said that some of the demonstrators were paid. You talked about €450. We've all heard what you said. The €450 that you talked about was from EDRI, the Civil Rights Association, that actually paid for its members to come to Brussels to take part in a lobby meeting. Now, it's the same with GAMA. They do exactly the same. If the GAMA invites members to Brussels, well, they don't pay for their own transport. That's not paying for people to demonstrate.
Mr. Roda, did you indicate a point of order? Can I try and solve this by the following? You have 1 minute speaking time coming up in a moment. Do you want to use that now for a question? Okay.
Upload filter
Please,
in
sir.
the text, and you won't allow me to ask her question.
I would allow.
Despite that she is lying in the plenary. That's
Sir.
absurd.
You know, I can hear you, but I'm not sure everyone else can because your microphone's not on. I'm trying to make sure, Madam Reid, if you sit down for a moment, I'm trying to make sure that the people who've come into this chamber early to be in Catch the Eye get that moment. Because you are insisting and it's disrupting the debate, Madam Reda, will you take a short question from Mr. Roda? I hope you will now respect my decision from here on in. Sir, you have 30 seconds now.
Well, thank you. I just want to ask you, where's that upload filter? Frau Reda, wo ist dieser Upload-Filter?
Where is this upload filter, Ms. Reda? Yeah, where is it in the text? Please, please tell me.
You have 30 seconds.
Sehr geehrter Mr. Roda, in the text it says that platforms have to prevent uploading of notified products. Now, they can try to get licenses, but the right holders do not have to grant them a license. And in the case of doubt, they can insist on upload filters. That's in the text expressly.
Please, colleagues, I now give the floor to Mr. Maštálka for 1.5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Chair. Well, today's plenary, I mean, it feels like the end of a World Cup final rather than a rational parliamentary debate. Anyway, I think that will be speaking for us all if I say that we'll all be very relieved once this text is voted on, and that's regardless of the result. Now, I fundamentally disagree with Articles 11 and 13, but nevertheless we have 2 years of hard work and tough negotiations behind us. It is no secret that I am not happy with the result and will be recommending my group to vote against this proposal. We have wasted a unique opportunity to modernise copyright in such a way that we would stimulate European creative industries, support innovation and small and medium enterprises. Instead of that, what we have on the table here is something that builds in internet censorship, cheats new startups, strangles chat rooms and discussion fora, and will, in the end, affect every single user of social media networks. It will be the end of the internet as we know it. There's plenty of specific examples I could mention, but there's not enough time. In addition, I believe that if colleagues vote in favour of this today, and I repeat, vote in favour, then it'll be a slap in the face of thousands of citizens who've been sending us emails, signing petitions and demonstrating on the streets. The European Parliament will thereby show people why more and more member states are becoming sceptical of the European Parliament as an institution. It will be a display of arrogance and power, distance from citizens, and exactly what we need to change. Thank you.
For 2 minutes, Mr. Arnott.
We're being lobbied extensively by both sides of this debate. On one side, I'm hearing from huge numbers of ordinary people who are concerned about the future of their internet. And on the other side, we've got cocktail receptions, slick advertising, even saw a taxi on the way here advocating this legislation. Now, don't think for a second that the creative industries are uniformly behind this legislation, because they're not. But the big players are the ones with the money to lobby, and I care far more about the voices and views of my constituents, about ordinary people, than the views of lobbyists who are paid to tell us what they want us to think. Now, of course, what we need is a balance between protecting creators of copyrighted material and protecting the lawful rights of citizens going about their daily business. But this legislation, in particular Articles 11 and 13, does not deliver that balance. It is fundamentally illiberal, because in practice, tech companies will end up treating citizens as guilty until proven innocent on copyright. Content will end up being removed automatically. It will push one-size-fits-all enforcement upon platforms across Europe, despite national copyright law being different from one country to the next. You can't deal with that minefield, so legal content will end up being treated as though it is illegal. Many of you here are true believers in the European project. All I can say is what I see from the United Kingdom. British people's opinions on this place haven't changed very much. People who supported Remain still support Remain. People who voted Leave still support Leave, generally speaking. But I have had people come to me to tell me that they voted Remain in 2016, but now would vote Leave because of the Copyright Directive. In other European countries, if you vote for this today, you will drive a wedge between the European Union and young people across Europe. This is bad legislation. It is classic end-of-term legislation. This Parliament has 3.5 minutes. This Parliament has 3.5 weeks to complete its business ready for the European elections, and things are being rushed through because of that. They have not been properly and fully considered. Please listen to your constituents on this. Please don't make the chasm between this Parliament and the people of the United Kingdom, the people of Europe, any wider than it already is.
Thank you. There is a blue card request from Mr. Strojewski. Will you accept? So, Mr. Strojewski, you have 30 seconds.
Yes.
Thank you. Well, I'm one of the last people you could call a lobbyist, but very much I would like to distinguish between different kinds of lobbyists. And I'd like to say that that group of people who are fighting for their right to remuneration cannot be called lobbyists. So my question is, sir, do you distinguish between large commercial lobbyists from those people who are fighting purely and exclusively to get paid for what they do? Thank you.
I have no problem with people who are wanting to make a living putting their points. That is absolutely what they should do. And I have also no problem with average members of the public putting their points across. But what I'm seeing is that time and time again, we're being pushed by the industry rather than being pushed by those creators. And actually, when I hear from creators in my constituency, I don't hear it as this one-sided idea that they desperately want this. I actually hear from both sides there, but also I'm seeing from the members of the public, they really are very, very concerned about the impact of 11 and 13.
Our next speaker for 1 minute is Madame Boutonnet.
Je vous remercie.
Thank you. Today we'll be voting on the Copyright Directive. It'll be a historic day for creation in Europe, or a black day for culture. The text tabled is the result of almost 3 years of meticulous work. Its content is in no way what is portrayed in this fake news that's been spread, all the rumors that have been circulated. No, the text strikes a balance between the interests of creators and users. Users will be strengthened in their rights, particularly vis-à-vis online platforms that too often just withdraw their content for no legal reasons. And also creators will be entitled to fair payment from these platforms that are growing rich at their expense. Freedom is something you have to conquer. It's never been truer. And so I say yes to creators, to editors, to artists, to culture, and to freedom by voting for this text. Thank you.
Mr. Fontoulis, for 1 minute, please.
While we speak, many companies on the internet, and especially in social media, apply censorship based exclusively on the wishes of their owners. How do we legitimize these private entities to limit our liberties? Categorizing content can be used in order to exclude from the internet various entities. For example, just the mention of my name or publishing my speech in the European Parliament in a certain social media suffices to punish the owner of the media for a certain time. So this is bad news for freedom. This is Orwell's world. Filters identifying banished words. This is less freedom. This is one of the most black pages of our history, reminding us of the Soviet Union. Is this the future we aspire to in the EU? We're going to vote against the report, and especially against this particular provision. Thank you.
Half minutes. Madam Verheyen.
Colleagues, for more than 2.5 years, we've been battling within the Parliament and the Member States to try and get a balanced compromise. And finally, we got a text which allows for greater fairness on the internet, and in particular is calling on these capitalist companies to show responsibility. Copyright or intellectual property right is a right, and now we're fighting against cultural works not getting remunerated. In 2016, a director was earning €19,000. That cannot be the aim of our society or our politics. The same politicians who are calling for a minimum wage and adequate salaries, adequate income, are ignoring a situation where capitalist giants are continuing to exploit us. Now, the aim of this directive is not to have blocks or filters, but to remunerate content. Now, where there's no giants, then culture is facilitated. Article 17.8.9, there are many other places that give safeguards, and there are many exceptions as well to avoid disproportionate requirements on non-commercial platforms such as Wikipedia, Dropbox and eBay. These are essentially excluded from the directive. Also, startups and SMEs, there are special rules. If they are not covered by the exceptions, then proportionality comes into play. So we want the internet to be fair, and the platforms are the ones that reap the greatest profits. We've got to create some rules that will allow for fairness on the internet and finally put an end to this unbridled capitalism.
For 1 minute, Madame Rosier.
Madame la Présidente.
Thank you, Chair. This directive is the fruit of 2.5 years of hard work, and all of Europe's culture, artists, authors, journalists, producers, editors, researchers are waiting for it, but so are users, platform users and consumers. Consumers are expecting it because it will offer legal safeguards and protect them from arbitrary decisions by platforms. And these are companies that have become monstrous, not just because of their size, but because of their practices. They pillage our personal data, our private time, our private lives, but they also pillage the work of Europe's creators and artists. How can they accept that their work is longer paid because it's in the digital arena? No, all work receives remuneration. And we've also seen their aggressive lobbying. We cannot close our eyes to that, to the threats that we've received, and the at least dark funding that some of these organizations are receiving. We must protect this predatory ultraliberalism in order to defend Europe's culture. Thank you very much.
Thank you. 1 minute, Mr. Zlotowski.
Madam President, thank you very much.
Just a minute ago, we saw a dispute about what really is at stake in this directive. it's the distillation of what the problem is, because the biggest problem with this directive, ladies and gentlemen, is the fact that its interpretation is going to be a bigger deal than the text itself. As Mr. Voss presented it, and it was a very unconvincing presentation. It was unclear, foggy terminology, weak definitions. Introducing neighbouring rights for press publishers is going to be a major throttle on public debate. It's only going to be the largest publishers who will remain on the market, and they already are shaping public opinion in the biggest way. They're going to create an information monopoly which other groups, smaller portals, won't be able to break, and therefore I would like to call you to reject and vote against this directive.
Mr. Gohl, for 1 minute, please. Sir.
Thank you. It's unbelievable what we are hearing today, particularly from the left, protecting the interests of these tech giants that don't even pay their taxes. I would like to address some of the misconceptions that have been circulating in this debate. There is no link tax. There are no upload filters. Regardless of how hard Reda insists, there are no upload filters, and there are no limitations on the individual citizens' rights. On the contrary, because now responsibility lies squarely with the platforms. And at present, we are gladly accepting that Facebook and other giants have poorly educated tech workers deciding, what should be uploaded and what shouldn't, what can and can not be out there. Whereas creators have no rights, no control over the works of art they have created. This is the world's biggest art heist. It's committed by tech giants that pay no wages, that pay no taxes, and without protection for our creators, we will be both economically poorer and culturally and spiritually poorer. And therefore, I hope you will support this text today. Thank you.
Truppel, for 1 minute, please.
Colleagues, we want to have a free but also fair internet. We want freedom and responsibility. We do not want any censorship. None of us wants that. Censorship is in China, but there's no copyright protection there. What we want is that active commercial platforms will finally have to work with licenses. Everything that's licensed would not be filtered. We want a win-win situation. The uploaders are getting legal certainty. There's no warnings anymore. The platforms have to take responsibility, and the journalists and the creators are finally going to get paid. These are fair rules. We're bringing justice to the freedom of the internet. We all want that. We need rules for these platform capitalists. They've got to pay taxes. They've got to take up responsibility if there are disinformation campaigns. We need data protection. We've already adopted that. And copyright protection is part of the package of rules. It's not about over-regulation. It's simply about having fair rules. And creators are a minority in our society. They need our protection. They need our support. So please vote in favour of this directive. It's about fairness on the internet. Thank you.
Thank you. For 1 minute, Madam Michels.
Thank you. Well, European harmonisation and copyright is being welcomed in various places, but what is on the table here is very much not a courageous step. Those in favour of this reform, in particular publishers, say that creators have been strengthened, but 5 million people, and please let me remind you, those are also creators. 5 million people have signed a petition to say that you shouldn't leave decisions on fundamental rights up to machines. That's what you have the rule of law for. Anyway, the upload filters in Article 13, Article 17, wherever you see the danger, small providers cannot compete and get licenses, global licenses. That's absurd. So platforms and regulating platforms, it should be done, but it should be done differently. Taxes, ethical guidelines. And that's why we've been disappointed by the trilogue outcomes, and let's find better solutions, because we're not here to sanitize the market. We're in favor of free communication in the 21st century on and off the internet.
Mr. Batten, 1 minute.
against fair copyright and protecting the legitimate rights of authors, but this directive is about promoting the interests of multinational corporations and maximising their profits. It is also about controlling and shutting down free speech and dissent, not approved of by the media and political establishments. Dissenting voices are already being deplatformed and demonetised, and this will institutionalise censorship. UKIP MEPs and others forced a vote on this directive using the rules of procedures. Otherwise, it would have gone through on the nod last year. MPs should take note that the European elections will follow shortly. Voters should take note of who voted, which MEPs and which parties voted for this directive, and they should vote against them on the 23rd of May. The European Union and the political and media establishments want to suppress free speech and dissent. If MPs vote for this directive, then they deserve to lose their seats.
Mr. Sośnierz, for 1 minute.
Internet stał się tym.
Thank you. Well, the internet has become what it is. It's a world in miniature thanks to the voluntary contributions of ordinary people and a lack of regulation. And that's what annoys you, because the internet is an example of how the world could develop if you weren't burdened by a heavy rucksack of regulations and rules which everyone had to carry around every day. The internet is the last bastion of freedom, and that's what means that you can't sleep at night, because it shows that your regulations and directives are basically unnecessary and harmful, and the world would do better without them. It would be developing just like the internet does. And you know, if you didn't have additional added values and all that kind of jargon, then we'd have simpler and better lives. And that's why you're trying to destroy this. That's why you're trying to slam on the brakes whenever you can. But we do not want you to slam on the brakes. People are protesting, and that's why we've moved forward another few centimeters. But we do not want your internet traps. We want creators to be able to continue without any regulation.
Next speaker for 1 minute, Mr. de Grandes Pascual.
Ladies and gentlemen, this Article 13 is trying to attribute the responsibility the platforms have to them in the case of copyright infringement. There are many copyright infringements on the internet caused by freedom that's there. So users upload any content they want, including content that's protected by copyright, meaning that it belongs to someone. We need to bear something in mind. Copyright are property rights, just like any other property rights, be they tangible or not. It's in place so that creators can live off their work, and we need to protect that unequivocally. Platforms will now be responsible for what they publish, because the platforms are the ones that benefit, they profit from this content, either through advertising revenue or analysis of data. So they need to make sure that they cannot just upload content without the consent of whoever created that content. And what we're here trying to do is redress the balance which has been thrown off because of the freedom online. And I support this text. Thank you.
For 1 minute, Mr. Vulcan.
President, thank you very much. Only Google is against this reform. That's what the proponents of this directive are saying. But that isn't true. The data protection is against it. The UN Special Rapporteur, many scientists and many creators themselves are against it. This reform will mean that users are maybe fairer but not more creative. So this is not so much about copyright. It's about how we deal with democracy. 5 million people who signed a petition are being described as a mob by the Commission. Critical young people are being termed bots or purchase protesters. Young people protesting are being accused of getting €450 to go and protest. Now, this debate is about our democracy, and we've got to ensure that young Europeans are taken seriously who have huge concerns about this reform. which would destroy the internet as they've known it. Colleagues, we've got to delete Article 13.
Mr. Vulcan, we have a blue card request. Mr. Radke, will you accept? Okay, please. 30 seconds for the question.
Ja, lieber Kollege.
Yes, dear Mr. Vulcan, you've just listed who, apart from Google, is against this reform. I mean, the Justice Minister, and Ms. Bala, you didn't mention her in the list, and she's the Spitzenkandidat for the S&D. So what is her position? You voted in favour in council, and now she's going round SPD party convention saying we need to stop this. And therefore I'm a little woolly on this. How we need to, what's clarity?
Dennis, well, it's an honour for me to help you. The Justice Minister rejects these upload filters and had to admit defeat to the Chancellor because the Chancellor concluded a deal with the French government, as the FHZ reported. Now, there has been this horse trading. The FHZ wouldn't be publishing this for nothing.
Minute, Mr. Luca, you have the floor.
Madam President, ladies and gentlemen, it is extraordinary what the FHZ has disclosed. It seems that all sorts of different issues are being brought together. There's been an exchange and a horse trading between Nord Stream on one hand and the upload filters. But I don't think that is the style that we should be conducting politics. We've got to be much more objective. Now, we do need these upload filters to enforce copyright. Now, no one wants to take revenue away from the creators, but is it really necessary to do it with these filters? Well, if people in this House saying that the law does not contain these filters, that's not true, because of course it is in the law that each platform, before it publishes content, has to check whether copyright has been infringed. This monitoring is filtering, and therefore there is an upload filter in this law. This upload filter leads to over-blocking, and the fact that these small creators that don't have publishers behind them, it's not going to allow them to disseminate their content. It's going to be anti-competitive. So we've got to delete Article 13. Otherwise, it's really not fair for copyright. Thank you.
Thank you. 1 minute, Madam Tum.
Thank you, Chair. Colleagues, the fact that this directive took 2.5 years doesn't make it better, unfortunately. The impact of this directive on human rights is drastic, as had been pointed out by academics, digital rights NGOs, and David Kay, the UN Special Rapporteur on the right of freedom and of opinion and expression. In particular, when it comes to the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, which clearly states everyone has the right to seek, receive, and impart information and ideas through any media and regardless of frontiers. This is exactly what Articles 11 and 13 will breach, by creating obstacles in the way we seek, receive, and impart information. It is clear that the rights of creators need to be protected, but creators and right holders are not the same. And we need to consider that this proposal is not balanced. We are putting the right of a small group ahead of the rights of everyone else. The last time we voted in September, there were several alternatives on the table. Now that is not the case. It is either accepting Articles 11 and 13 as is, or rejecting them. I would like to urge my colleagues to vote to delete these articles. The damage to our fundamental rights will simply be too high. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Anderson, for 1 minute.
Thank you, Chair. I would like to talk about a ridiculous conspiracy theory advanced by the copyright lobby. That those of us who want a free and open internet are in the payoff or have been fooled or hoodwinked by Google and Facebook. That is just tosh. We have been fighting against the internet giants for years. We have been fighting for data protection. We have been fighting for people's privacy. We have been fighting against their monopolistic tendencies. I would like to hit Google and Facebook where it hurts. I would like them to pay their taxes. I'm fighting for the digital tax. We're fighting for strong e-privacy regulation. We're fighting for them to take editorial responsibility for what they're doing. But this is not the right thing to do. I don't trust Google and Facebook, but I do trust all the experts that are saying that Article 11 and 13 is bad for the internet and should not be a collateral damage.
For 1 minute, Mr. Lahiric.
Merci, Madame la Présidente.
Thank you, President. It's time to legislate so that the big North American digital groups can pay to journalists and creators what are their fair dues because of the revenues that they attract from advertising, for example. And this is also the case of the media. We know that creation in the EU, as we just heard from Mr. Cavada, represents billions of euros every year. There are now more people working in the creative sectors than in the automobile industry, for example. And so here we're now voting on the copyrights directive and linked rights, and we're working in favor of pluralism. We're trying to rebalance the situation because that will force tech giants to respect creators and journalists, and it also offers legal certainty to users, which we don't have so far. And it also protects everyone's access to knowledge while promoting the renewal of creation by protecting creation. We need to defend the protection of content, not plundering. That is the objective of this directive. Thank you.
Mr. Scholtek, for 1 minute, please.
Thank you. This version of the directive will still introduce censorship on a level which we didn't have in communist countries. And let's look at the text and see what it really means. I mean, there's no point trying to convince members here. Most people already have their opinions fixed, and therefore let me turn to the citizens of Europe. Citizens of Europe, if you do not want to lose the rest of your freedom, then force the governments of your countries to leave the European Union. Start Italexit, Polexit, take examples from Brexit. Let's leave this bureaucratic monster which is the European Union. Let's create a real union of Europe, a union of nations, an innovative, renewing union. What is stopping you from voting against those who vote in favour of this? Thank you.
Sir, there are blue card requests. Will you take a blue card from Mr. Strojewski? Yes? You accept a question? A question from Mr. Strojewski? Will you accept?
Yes, I will.
Bardzo dziękuję.
Thank you very much. Well, you said so that you are against this directive and therefore against remuneration of creators in the creative sector, but you said they are in favour of Polexit. Are you not also a head of a Polexit party whose main aim is to take Poland out of the EU?
Sir, before you answer, we have another blue card, so I'm going to put them together. So, Mr. Cavada.
Mine's very short, Madam President. I'd like to ask my colleague, who's very convincing on the idea that you have to leave the EU. Why is he still continuing to come here, even though it's so painful for him to be here?
Microphone, please, for Mr. Żółtek.
Please, sir, your microphone. Just 1 moment. Your microphone. Please press the microphone.
Yes. I come here publicly to the Parliament. I mean, it might be a month since I last voted, but never mind. I am in favour of Poland leaving the European Union. I'm also in favour of other countries leaving the European Union and founding a new European Union, not this bureaucratic monster. I mean, a proud and inflated monster, which the EU is. I voted in favour of that, so I don't really understand the question. I voted publicly, yes, and I do everything I can in Poland for that to happen. And as for this Parliament, well, when I've been here, then my attitude is if the EU does not change, then we need to leave. But what's happened recently, what's happening with this directive, what's happening with other laws which have recently been passed, that just means that they don't really change my opinion. We just simply need to leave and refound the Union, because as it is, the Union is a monster.
Thank you, sir. You answered one question and there were two, but I don't have the time to give you to continue. So I give the floor now for 1 minute to Mr. Salini.
Grazie.
Thank you, President. My first thanks, though, are to a colleague, Axel Voss, for the exceptional work that he has done up to now. I think this can be considered one of the most important battles in the whole mandate that we're about to conclude, because Europe is creativity, it is work, and it is art. And the reason why this battle defends the Europe that people love is because it's defending precisely that. So those colleagues who are battling this directive, can I ask them to think very carefully. If the web platforms intend to cash in billions of dollars from advertising, they've also got to recognize the value of work, the work that allows them to make money from the advertising. So yes, do continue the battle to make sure that there's no advertising on Google. That would make this whole debate much more democratic. Madam Rader, you talked about young people. Well, those young people, that also includes boys and girls today who are paid €3 per piece of excellent journalism that they write, precisely because the platform is not paying the copyright. So if you want to defend those young people, defend copyright.
For 1 minute, Mr. Grammatikakis, you have the floor.
The battle for intellectual property started as a technical discussion. However, it evolved in a battle for the soul of Europe, its culture and its values. The agreement makes sure that authors will survive in the digital era. It also proves something even more important, that the EU has the courage to take on the huge conglomerates of technology and their capabilities to mislead citizens. I'm impressed by the fact that some colleagues do not understand this. 2.5 years down the road, after so many negotiations and after 3 different commissions and 5 votes at the plenary, we now have in front of us the best possible result. It is very telling, actually, that the directive is supported by all official bodies or representing authors and performers. As a rapporteur at the committee, I would like to call on all colleagues who are in favor of an open and free and fair internet to support the outcome of the trilogue. It is good for the future of Europe, dear colleagues. It is good for the future of all of us and our Europe. Thank you.
Sulik, for 1 minute, please.
Thank you very much. The current directive on copyright, which is going to be changed by the current proposal, is freer. I mean, it would be restricted by the current proposal, particularly Articles 11 and 13. Just look at Wikipedia. If you look at Article 11, then everything is going to be subject to the directive. Then everything except for very short snippets are going to be included, and it's not clear what very short snippets mean. There's also an obligation on social media platforms to make sure that content isn't stolen. Well, I mean, that's like making someone who runs a parking garage responsible for cars that are stolen on it. More people have signed the petition against this than signed the petition against summertime and wintertime. So I'm really surprised that the Commission is ignoring this groundswell of opinion. I tabled an amendment to delete Articles 11 and 13. Thank you very much.
Mr. Bogovic, 1 minute.
Spoštovani, tako kot imamo pravico do svobode govora na internetu.
Thank you very much. We're all entitled to express ourselves freely online. We're also entitled to be protected there. The cultural contents and independent journalism are the pillars of our society. And these debates try to make out that these two sets of rights are contradictory, but that's not true at all. Axel Voss has done an excellent job for 2.5 years now, and we've focused on the biggest platforms. They're the ones that make the largest profits as well. And they do not share these profits with authors. If we want independent journalism, and to make sure that we have independent art as well, then we have to adopt this directive. It's not going to lead to it's not going to solve all the problems we have with GAFA, but it will protect culture and creation and from a lot of injustices. Thank you.
Mr. Blanco Lopez.
Thank you, Madam President. No one is claiming to put an end to freedom of the internet, but internet cannot be a lawless territory. There will not be content to exploit if there's no creation. There'll be no creation if there's no fair remuneration. This directive seeks to correct these imbalances, to strengthen the creators and to rebalance the value chain. And I don't understand how the supposed left, how some of them are defending exploitation of creators and are not defending redistribution of wealth of the large platforms. I simply don't understand that. No one is gagging freedom of expression. We're not imposing a monitoring obligation. There's no risks or anything like that. But what we're doing is worthy of the 21st century, and it strengthens the freedom of expression, the freedom of creation, and fair remuneration for work done.
Sir, Mr. Blanco Lopez, there are 2 blue card questions. Will you accept the questions? So could I ask Mr. Rubik and Mr. Matthias? Madam Matthias, to please ask a question in 30 seconds each. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I just wanted to ask Mr. Blanco Lopez whether it's true that all non-commercial users will be accepted from the scope if they're up and downloading. Thank you.
Madam Matthias.
Thank you, President. Thank you. The colleague said that there would be no creation without fair remuneration for those who create. Well, I think he's ignoring the fact that there is no express mention of fair remuneration in the text. It just seems to be outlining censorship. Thank you.
Rebalancing the value chain is about the fact that these large platforms should contribute with fair remuneration for creators. It's about paying for the value of the creation. It's not about exploitation. That's why I repeat, I do not understand why certain voices on the left are wanting the benefit of a few to the detriment of creation and work of all the creators in our Europe, our countries.
Sir, I'm not sure if you answered Mr. Rubik's question. Mr. Blanco Lopez, Mr. Rubik had a question. Did you want to answer that question? But he already asked it. He already asked the question. Can you recall what he asked? Perhaps, Mr. Rubik, you could repeat the question.
Yes, thank you. I just wanted to ask Mr. Blanco Lopez whether it's true that all non-commercial users will be accepted from the scope of this directive, and therefore ordinary citizens won't be able to complain about copyright violations, and that in future it's just purely going to be the responsibility of the platforms to take care of that.
No, I don't think that's the case.
We move now to our next speaker for 1 minute, Mr. Fisas Ayala.
I think this is a balanced text which takes into account the interests of all the parties. However, for the world of sports, it's been very disappointing that there were no specific mention included for the rights of organizers of sports events, which was in an original amendment to Article 12A, which was adopted with almost 400 votes in favor in this chamber. Now, we've had the Murphy sentence in the Premier League, which established that member states can protect sporting events and that the Commission would analyse the protection regimes. But the Commission has simply chosen to issue a general declaration. But it is very important to protect also the organisers of sports events. In the case of their own events, it's as important as protecting the rights of creators of content. But I will vote in favour of this text because I think it is indispensable that we should protect the creative industries in Europe.
1 minute, please.
Thank you very much. This debate has shown how lively and passionate parliamentary democracy can be. We don't agree on the solution, but I don't think anyone's going to be bored by watching this debate today. Copyright is out of date, we agree on that, and internet giants are raking it in while lots of creators are not, particularly those who are not big artists, who aren't writing bestsellers or writing chart hits. They need us to find appropriate solutions because their lives are getting more and more precarious. So we can't break the internet, but we need to adapt copyright to the internet age. I'm against private internet companies being able to control the creative freedoms, which is to everybody's detriment. And imposing that responsibility on platforms will lead to upload filters and hence to internet censorship. My interest in this whole process has always been to protect the interests of creators. They should have a right to fair remuneration. And therefore, I'm very disappointed with this outcome with respect to what we voted from the Legal Affairs Committee.
We move now to Catch the Eye. The first speaker for 1 minute, Madam Šojdrová.
Thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, I'd firstly like to thank Mr. Axel Voss, the rapporteur, for his conscientious work and indeed his bravery, because we have had to face a very, very concerted campaign. I will vote in favour because I think that the compromise achieves good balance between the interests of internet platforms and authors, publishers, and us as users of the internet. Non-commercial platforms such as Wikipedia or sharing peer-to-peer platforms have been accepted. Article 13 is the most emotive issue, and this has become a symbol of the anti-censorship movements. But the critics of Article 13 have not put forward any constructive proposal about how else creators' work can be remunerated. In other words, how to prevent authors being stripped and robbed of their rights. It's not just about authors and creators, it's about us as consumers. It's our interest that should have high quality work on the internet, and that's why I'll be voting in favour.
We have a blue card request from Madam Konečná. We don't normally take them and Catch the Eye, but I'll take this very brief question. Madam Konečná, please. Sorry, will you accept, Madam Šojdrová? Yeah.
Thank you very much, Chair. I would just like to ask Mrs. Šojdrová if she's talking about a concerted campaign, then what does she think of the fact that some Czech publishers are simply issuing threats, that they are threatening journalists and saying that those who voting in favour of the interests of Czech journalists will be protected and those who don't will suffer the consequences? What do you think of that kind of campaign that is, if you talk about a campaign against? This is just horse trading, nothing else, nothing more. We just have a different opinion. Well, I'd like to say that what I appreciate and think is important in this debate is openness, transparency and democratic decision making. If you let yourselves be blackmailed, then that's your problem. I do not submit to blackmail. A campaign is a campaign. People submit their views, they tell us what they think, and it's our job to find a just and fair solution which is going to be good for authors, creators, users. We shouldn't submit to manipulation. Let's defend our viewpoints and vote accordingly.
Aguilar, 1 minute.
Madam President, thank you. After almost 3 years of work, what would be reasonable is to reach a conclusion that is fair, proportionate and balanced, but it would not be excusable for the Parliament not to do its work to protect fundamental rights. Now, the freedom of expression, of course, is very important, and the freedom to create and literary work, scientific, technical, that is a fundamental right. It is a fundamental right in Spain. The EU has to protect the most vulnerable. Now, clearly, the most vulnerable are the creators and artists. They need protection against the tech giants who are infringing on fundamental rights, attacking our privacy, using our data, organising mass trolling campaigns that seek to extort this Parliament and individual members, trying to force them to take a decision. Now, the good result is that we have this directive. The internet will continue to prevail, and so will freedom of expression, but it will be the individual creators will be more protected.
Mr. Marinho e Pinto.
Senhora Presidente, caros colegas.
Chair, colleagues, I can understand Google, Apple, Facebook and Amazon. I understand their position and that of all the American platforms that are against this directive, because it threatens their enormous profits, the profits that they're making year on year in Europe. How do they do that? Well, by offering free content, but it's content that's produced by journalists, authors, editors. And I understand that Ms. Reda is against this copyright directive because she's in favor of legalizing piracy. That's why she belongs to the Pirate Party. It's a pirate fundamentally opposed to copyrights. And I can also understand the far right opposing this directive for obvious reasons, because they're against the EU overall. What I do not understand, however, is that there are members of this House which at home defend national culture and European culture, but come here and are against this directive. Thank you.
Mr. Pimento Lopes.
Obrigado, Senhora Presidente. Assistimos arrufo de gigantes.
Thank you. We are seeing a fight of the giants that has nothing to do with safeguarding the rights of creators and users. Now, what this is about is distribution of profits coming from publication of content without actually remunerating the creators, and therefore there'll be unfairness and precariousness if this continues. And freedom for creators, freedom of press, freedom of culture will be covered, and at the same time we're seeing a monopoly and a mercantilization of culture. These proposals guarantee fair remuneration to artists and creators, also for their works, and it's compatible with democracy and diversification of culture and free disclosure of works without any kind of filtering. What it calls for from the large platforms is for them to redistribute the huge profits.
Verkunen, please, 1 minute.
Arvoisa puhemies.
President, this directive on copyright is not perfect, but it is a result of 5 years of negotiations and a compromise. I would like to warmly thank Axel Voss for the work that you have done amidst all of these conflicts. It is important that we assure the rights of the producers of works.
Okay, madam, maybe you could start again, please, your intervention, and let's see if the interpretation works.
Okay. Arvoisa
President, this copyright directive is surely not perfect. It is very seldom that our legislation is, but it is a result of 5 years of work and a compromise, and I would like to warmly thank Axel Voss and everyone who participated in this work for everything that has been done. We must assure the rights of producers even during our digital era. This is a good principle also in a digital world. It is important to note that the copyright directive does not violate the freedom of expression. It does not mean filters or blocking. It means that those network platforms which concentrate on commercially promoting copyright affected material is affected. We will need a license or permission for this in the future, and this is a good principle.
Thank you. Madam Gephardt.
Thank you very much, Chair. 2 reasons why we should not vote in favour of this directive. Firstly, startups are not truly accepted from the scope. After 3 years, they will be forced to adopt filters developed by big enterprises. And that's a great business model for the big American platforms, and surely that can't be what we want. It's also not really what the directive was intended to do, namely to tackle the problem of poor remuneration for creators and authors. These aims have been watered down in the recitals, watered down totally, and that's not what we want. We want strong rights for creators, and they are not guaranteed by this proposal, because it's only those who work for the publishers who will be protected, and everybody else who are truly independent will not enjoy that protection. I think it's exactly the wrong approach.
And this is the last speaker on Catch the Eye, Madam Costa. I give the floor to Madam Costa.
Thank you, President. We Europeans have to be very ambitious with this directive. We have to make it clear to the world that also the giants in the digital arena cannot exploit people, trample people's rights, and ignore the efforts of professionals and creators, and have defamation and intimidation campaigns against European citizens. We know that today they're trying to protect their commercial interests worth billions. We have to know that the large platforms get 80% from advertising, and they do not give fair remuneration to the rights holders or the journalists. We've explained it to Silicon Valley. It's about freedom, civility, and responsibility.
I wasn't stopping you. I was just saying that the interpreters wanted you to slow down a little. You have 15 seconds left.
Sorry.
If you wish to use it, but it's entirely in your decision. I can't hear you, madam. The microphone isn't towards you. You have 15 seconds. It's rather short.
I know. It's my problem.
Slow,
because
please.
there's so short time.
I was saying that this is the battle about civility, because it's protecting cultural diversity and the value of intellectual cultural work, pluralism in the journalistic world, and quality journalism. We're defending millions of jobs in art, music, cinema, television, literature, and the survival of a free professional journalism. We have standing against the giants of fake news. We have exceptions then, but we want access to the whole of Europe for commercial players as well.
Mr. Faria, you were indicating, please, well then, there is a confusion here because you weren't on my list. So I will give the floor to you and one from the S&D who were on the list. And Madam Ward, I'm afraid there's so many others, I don't think I'm going to get to it. Let me just check with the services about our time, because I know this is a very important debate for colleagues. Okay, Mr. Faria, if you take the floor now, thank you. Okay. 1 minute, and please 1 minute.
Muito obrigado, Sr. Presidente. Temos que nos lembrar porque é que esta diretiva...
Thank you very much. We have to remember why this directive was tabled. It's not because people find it difficult to access culture online. No, there are sites where people can get paid fairly for their work. These sites are available, and piracy and contraband, they are already criminalized. Because, of course, if through those you profit from other people's work, and journalists are also protected. But we do have to think of this when we consider no longer being able to use an image or an excerpt of a text. You know, if somebody is living off their work, then they can live off their work if they're fairly remunerated. But if they're not, it becomes very difficult for the authors of those works to survive. And I feel that Europe's citizens have been manipulated.
Astăzi rezultă clar că e un lucru extrem de important.
Thank you very much. This is very important, and we've got to have rules. We know there are different positions, including divisions within our group. And of course, the main idea is protecting freedom of expression, but at the same time, we've got to ensure protection for authors and creators and pay for their works. Now, yes, of course, we want a digital market, but we want to protect the creative industries. We cannot live without culture, and people who produce it have to be paid. Of course, Articles 11, 13, 14 are not ideal, and we've discussed that together. But the articles have to be adopted to make sure we're taking a step forward to then maybe later improve the directive. But if we do nothing, that doesn't mean that the digital market or rights holders will benefit. Now, these articles have already been amended in the committee.
Minute. I understand there's some upset in the chamber if I don't give the floor to everyone. Go.
Grazie mille, Presidente. È la terza...
Thank you. This is the third time speaking in the plenary on the Copyright Directive. The first time I was in favour of taking the text back to the committee to get a better balance between freedom of the internet and the rights of the creators. Now, what's happened? That actually happened. This directive is necessary to have fair remuneration for copyright in a digital arena. Now, from my mailbox, I've been getting emails from citizens who are worried about the lobbies. Now, the internet is continually changing, and now we're looking at a virtual world. Nevertheless, we can never limit it. The agreement in the trilogue does not have censorship. On the contrary, it defends freedom of the internet and introduces responsibility for the online platforms. Thank you.
Aguilar Garcia.
Señora Presidenta.
Thank you very much, Chair. We're almost coming to the end of this debate. And I have to say, it's a very controversial debate. Not because there's a difference of opinion, which is all well and good, it's healthy, and that's what we usually see in all debates. But it's quite curious. This is a case of a necessary regulation of the digital market. However, people are debating very passionately, and it's become very controversial. And I find it quite shocking because there is distortion at present in the single digital market. And with this directive, we're trying to regulate copyright. And I think we've struck an excellent balance. And so why are we against regulation? Regulation is not the same as prohibition. It's simply a matter of outlining certain standards, certain provisions, so that everyone operating on that market, the commercial players, financial players, users, know what the rules are that we're playing by. So I urge everyone to vote in favour of this directive. Thank you.
Mrs. Ward.
I speak as Labour's spokesperson on culture in the EU and as someone who worked in the creative sector as the founder of a small to medium enterprise working in the digital sphere. This is the biggest reform of the EU copyright law for 15 years, and it will curb the tech giants' power over online content, including news and current affairs. Crucially, it will ensure that creative artists are fairly rewarded for their work. This reform package will address the unfair situation that means a song needs to be streamed 50 million times on YouTube before the artist can expect to earn the average UK salary. Copyright ensures authors, composers, artists, filmmakers and other creators receive recognition, payment and protection for their works. It rewards creativity and stimulates investment in the creative sector. And I want to thank organisations such as UK Music, Directors UK and the Writers Guild of Great Britain who...
Thank you, Madam Ward. I have to leave it at that. We will now give the floor for a response to the Vice President of the Commission, Commissioner Ansip.
Thank you, Honourable President. I would like to thank the honourable members of the European Parliament for this debate. Many speakers spoke about upload filters today. To be clear, upload filters are not mentioned in the text of the directive. But as we all know, they are already used by big platforms. Voting down the directive will not take away upload filters. The directive will, on the contrary, give our citizens the right to ask for re-uploads and contest removals of content that they should be able to upload. This is a major improvement on the current situation. The vote on the Copyright Directive is about Europe's message to its creators. It is simple. We care about you and we protect you so that you continue your invaluable work and contribution to our culture. Culture is what European societies are built on. It is the source of our values and our inspiration. The ultimate beneficiaries of this directive will be Europe's citizens. A modernised legal environment for copyright will improve their access to European arts, entertainment and quality journalism. This vote is also about the EU's ability to tackle the complex and important legal challenges of the online environment. We understand that there are different voices and different opinions. This is normal in such an important debate. We have listened to the different views and respect all of them. However, we believe that the text resulting from the trilogue is balanced and delivers on our objective to modernise European copyright law. It is time to step up and make European copyright law fit for the digital age. Thank you, President. Thank you, Mr. Voss and shadow rapporteurs. Thank you, honourable members.
Thank you very much, Mr. Vice President Ansip. Witam serdecznie Państwa.
Thank you very much and welcome to everybody. I'm taking over in the chair and I'd like to give the floor back to the rapporteur, Mr. Axel Voss. Thank you very much, Chair. Well, some of today's contributions to the debate have shown that the centre of this debate has got lost. This reform will not introduce censorship. It will introduce, or will not restrict reasonable freedom of expression. we'll be establishing legal certainty for proportionate, appropriate use with copyrighted content. And it will give a far wider range of options for ordinary users. Google, Facebook, and YouTube have introduced a governance by shitstorm. They've launched a misinformation campaign and spent a lot of money on influencing public opinion. It shows you how easy it is to use young people as a tool to use. But what's at stake here is our democracy. It's whether we can get this through in the face of powerful opposition from the platforms. This is a fundamental rights issue. This is about intellectual property. It's the right to intellectual property, and it's also about fair compensation, remuneration for rights holders. It is in our power today to protect and save European cultural heritage and not to allow it to be exploited by tech monopolies. It is also in our power today to protect our European cultural industries. Creators urgently need protection, and that's why I'd like to ask you all, vote in favour of today's proposal. It's a balanced reform. Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Voss. The debate is closed, and the vote will be today. Let's move on to the next item on the agenda, namely the report by Mr. Cozzolino on the European Regional Development Fund and Cohesion Fund. Let me start by giving the floor to the rapporteur, Mr. Andrea Cozzolino.
Thank you. Well, today we're having this discussion, and tomorrow we're going to be voting on it. We are now giving a very good text to the next Parliament and to the trialogue between the Council and the Commission. The European Regional Development Fund and the Cohesion Fund are the major public investment funds in the EU for the forthcoming MFF. Nevertheless, the budget cuts have been presented by the Commission, and we consider these to be unacceptable. It is not a luxury, nor is it a waste of public resources. Regional policy supports job creation, competitiveness between companies, economic growth, sustainable development, and improving the lives of citizens in all regions and cities of the Union. These are the key instrument to fight against territorial and social inequality. Now, it works to make sure no one's left behind, whether an individual, a territory, a city, or an outermost region. This is what's happened with Greece, Portugal, Ireland. This is what's happened with Italy after the terrible events of these years, the earthquakes. Now, we first of all have to protect our territory, including the cultural goods. Now, despite the last 10 years of austerity that have reduced development and strategic investment